The late July sun beat down on Morgan Hayes' weathered face as he followed the narrow path along the Salt River. At 43, his life had become a series of temporary stops across the American Southwest. 3 years on the road had worn lines into his face that hadn't been there when he left Chicago, but the constant movement had become the only thing that felt right after the divorce. Morgan adjusted his faded backpack and wiped sweat from his brow. He was on the outskirts of the Fort Apache Reservation in Arizona, passing through on his way to a seasonal job at a tourist lodge near Show Low. The terrain was rugged but beautiful, red earth, scrub brush, and the occasional cottonwood offering meager shade. The sound of rushing water grew louder as the river came into view. It had rained heavily in the mountains the previous week, and the normally gentle Salt River was swollen and swift. Morgan paused to drink from his canteen, scanning the turbulent waters. That's when he heard it, a child scream cutting through the rush of the current. About 50 yards downstream, a small form thrashed in the water, caught in the river's powerful grip. Without hesitation, Morgan dropped his backpack and sprinted along the bank. He could see now it was a young girl, no more than 7 or 8, her head barely above the churning surface. "Hold on," he shouted, knowing his voice would likely be drowned by the roar of the water. The child disappeared beneath the surface, then resurfaced, gasping and flailing. Morgan raced ahead of the current, looking for a spot where he might intercept her. Finding a slight bend in the river, he kicked off his boots and plunged into the cold water. The force of it nearly knocked him off his feet, but he braced himself against the current, extending his arms as the girl swept toward him. Her small body collided with his, and Morgan wrapped his arms around her, lifting her face above the water as she coughed and sputtered. The current pulled at them both, threatening to drag them under. With one arm firmly around the child, Morgan fought his way toward the shore, his feet searching for purchase on the slippery riverbed. By the time they reached the bank, Morgan's muscles burned with exhaustion. He pulled the girl onto the rocky shore and collapsed beside her, both of them gasping for breath. The child trembled violently, her dark hair plastered to her face, her brown eyes wide with fear. "You're okay now," Morgan said between breaths. "You're safe." The girl said something in Apache that Morgan couldn't understand, then switched to English. "My grandmother, she's looking for me." Morgan sat up, scanning the area. Where were you when you fell in?" "Up there," she pointed upstream. "We were gathering plants." As Morgan helped the girl to her feet, shouts echoed from the distance. An elderly woman appeared on the path, followed by a younger woman. Both broke into a run when they spotted the child. "Nijoni!" the older woman cried, embracing the soaking wet girl. The younger woman, the child's mother, Morgan guessed, joined the embrace, murmuring words of relief in Apache. When they finally looked up at Morgan, their expressions shifted from relief to cautious gratitude. The mother spoke first, in perfect English. "You saved my daughter. The current, it's never this strong. She slipped." "I'm just glad I was here," Morgan said simply. The grandmother studied him intently, her weathered face unreadable. She spoke to the mother in Apache, who then translated. "My mother says you appeared like smoke on the water. Where did you come from, stranger?" "Just passing through," Morgan replied. "Heading to a job up north." The grandmother spoke again, longer this time, her eyes never leaving Morgan's face. The mother listened, then nodded. "She says you must come with us. Our family owes you a debt. At least share a meal and dry your clothes." Morgan hesitated. He'd spent years avoiding connections, keeping to himself. His instinct was to politely decline, retrieve his backpack, and continue on his solitary journey. But something in the grandmother's steady gaze held him. The little girl, Nijoni, reached out and took his hand. "Please come," she said. "My grandmother makes the best fry bread." Looking down at her small fingers wrapped around his, Morgan felt something shift inside him. The first crack in the wall he'd built around himself since leaving Chicago. "All right," he said. "Just for a little while." None of them could have known then how that simple decision would change all their lives forever. The walk to the family's home took nearly an hour, following paths invisible to Morgan's untrained eye. The grandmother, whose name he learned was Desba, led the way with surprising agility for her age. The mother, Ella Begay, carried Najoni on her back, despite the girl's insistence that she could walk. The near drowning had left her exhausted, though she maintained a stream of chatter, occasionally translating her grandmother's observations for Morgan's benefit. They arrived at a modest house, set among a cluster of similar homes. A weathered pickup truck sat in the yard, and smoke rose from a small structure behind the main house that Najoni explained was her grandmother's cooking hogan. "My dad's not home," she informed Morgan. "He works at the forestry office. He'll be back tonight." Inside, the home was warm and lived in. Family photos covered the walls, Najoni in traditional dress at what appeared to be a ceremony, a tall man in a forestry uniform, Ella in a graduation cap and gown. The furniture was worn but comfortable, and the air smelled of sage and pine. Ella handed Morgan a towel and some clothes. "These are my husband's. They might be a bit large, but they're dry. The bathroom is down the hall." When Morgan emerged in the borrowed clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt that indeed hung loosely on his frame, Desba was already at work in the kitchen, her hands moving swiftly as she prepared the promised fried bread. Ella was on the phone, her voice low as she explained what had happened to someone on the other end. Najoni, now in dry clothes herself, sat at the kitchen table drawing. She looked up as Morgan entered and patted the chair beside her. "I'm making you a picture," she announced. "It's us by the river." Morgan sat beside her, studying the crayon drawing. Two stick figures standing in blue scribbles. One tall, one small. "It's very good," he said. Desba placed a steaming mug of coffee in front of him, then spoke to him directly for the first time, her English accented but clear. "The river took my husband 20 years ago," she said. "It tried to take my granddaughter today, but you were there. Why?" The directness of her question caught Morgan off guard. I was just passing through." "No such thing as just anything," Desba replied. "The path you walk is the path meant for you." Before Morgan could respond, the front door opened, and a man hurried in, the same man from the photos, Najoni's father. His worried expression melted into relief when he saw his daughter, and he crossed the room in 3 long strides to embrace her. "Daniel, this is Morgan," Ella said. "He pulled Najoni from the river." Daniel Begay straightened and extended his hand. His grip was firm, his gaze direct. "Thank you," he said simply, the words heavy with emotion. "My wife told me what happened. I can't." His voice caught. "Anyone would have done the same," Morgan said, uncomfortable with their gratitude. "Not anyone," Daniel replied. "Not everyone would risk their life for a stranger's child." As they sat down to eat, Morgan found himself enveloped in the family's warm conversation. They asked him gentle questions about his journey, respecting his reticence when it came to his past. Najoni dominated the conversation, her near drowning seemingly forgotten as she explained to Morgan the significance of various Apache traditions with the confident authority of a child. After the meal, as dusk settled over the reservation, neighbors began to arrive. Word had spread about the incident at the river and Morgan's role in it. Each visitor brought something, a dish of food, a small handcrafted item, a word of thanks. Morgan had never felt more conspicuous or more touched. An elder named Thomas, who Desba introduced as a respected community leader, studied Morgan with knowing eyes. "Our people have a saying," he told Morgan. "When you save a life, it becomes your responsibility. That life is now connected to yours." "I don't understand," Morgan said. Desba placed her weather hand over his. "It means you are no longer just a man passing through. The river brought you to us for a reason." As the evening progressed, Morgan found himself drawn into the community's orbit. For the first time in years, the restless urge to keep moving, to maintain his solitude, had quieted. Watching Najoni play with her cousins, who had arrived with their parents, he felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. "You'll stay the night," Daniel said. "It wasn't a question. Tomorrow is soon enough to decide what comes next." Morgan nodded, surprised to find he had no desire to refuse. Morgan woke to the scent of coffee and the sound of quiet conversation. He had slept on the Begay's couch, wrapped in a handmade quilt that Desba had insisted he use. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting stripes across the living room floor. For a moment, disorientation gripped him. It had been months since he'd slept anywhere but his tent or cheap motel rooms. In the kitchen, he found Ella and Daniel at the table, their conversation halting when he appeared. "Good morning," Ella said, rising to pour him coffee. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in a long time," Morgan admitted. "Thank you for your hospitality." Daniel nodded. "Najoni is still sleeping. The doctor said that's normal after what she went through." Morgan hadn't known they'd taken her to a doctor. "Is she okay?" "Yes," Ella assured him. "Just a precaution. The clinic said to let her rest." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Daniel spoke again. "My mother and some of the elders have been talking. They want to hold a small ceremony today. For Najoni and for you." Morgan shifted uncomfortably. "That's really not necessary." "It's not about necessity," Ella explained gently. "It's about recognition, about honoring what happened. In our tradition," Daniel added, "when someone faces death and returns, it's significant. And when a stranger becomes a protector, that too deserves acknowledgement." Before Morgan could protest further, the door opened, and Desba entered, carrying a basket of what looked like herbs and other plants. She greeted Morgan with a nod, then spoke rapidly to Daniel in Apache. "She wants to know if you'll stay for the ceremony." Daniel translated, though Morgan had gathered as much from her expectant expression. The thought of being the center of attention made Morgan uneasy, but refusing seemed impossible in the face of their sincerity. "I'll stay," he said. The morning passed in a flurry of preparation. More community members arrived, bringing food and helping to set up a small gathering area behind the house. Morgan tried to make himself useful, but was repeatedly told to relax, that he was their guest. Najoni woke mid-morning, her energy seemingly restored as she excitedly explained to Morgan what would happen. "Grandmother will bless us with cedar smoke," she told him. "And then there will be songs. And then everyone will eat together." By early afternoon, about 30 people had gathered. Morgan recognized some from the previous evening, but many were new faces, all regarding him with a mixture of curiosity and respect that made him deeply self-conscious. The ceremony began with Desba lighting a small bundle of cedar in a clay bowl. As the fragrant smoke rose, she used her hand to waft it toward Najoni, who stood solemnly in a dress decorated with intricate beadwork. Desba spoke words in Apache that seemed to wash over the gathered community, who responded with murmurs of agreement. Then, to Morgan's surprise, Desba turned to him, gesturing for him to step forward. He hesitated, then moved to stand beside Najoni. The old woman's eyes held his as she circled him with the sweet-smelling smoke, speaking words he couldn't understand but somehow felt in his chest. Thomas, the elder from the night before, stepped forward and addressed the gathering in English. "Yesterday, the river nearly took one of our children, but the Creator sent a protector, a man with no connection to our people, a traveler, a stranger. Yet he acted without hesitation, risking his own life." Thomas turned to Morgan. "In our way, such an act creates a bond that cannot be broken. You pulled Najoni from the water, from the boundary between this world and the next. In doing so, you have become family." Desba spoke again, and Daniel translated. "My mother says that you came like smoke on the water, appearing when needed, without explanation. So she gives you the name Son of Smoke, among our people, and through your actions, Najoni is now your daughter in our way." Morgan felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected this, hadn't sought any recognition beyond the simple thanks already given. He looked down at Najoni, who beamed up at him with complete trust, and felt the weight of what he was being offered, not just a name, but belonging. "I don't know what to say," he managed. "You don't need to say anything," Daniel told him. "Just accept what is being given." As the community gathered closer, offering their own words of welcome and thanks, Morgan felt the walls he'd built around himself over the past 3 years begin to crumble. For the first time since leaving Chicago, he wasn't just passing through. He was being invited to stay. For the next 3 days, Morgan stayed with the Begay family, telling himself each morning that he would leave tomorrow, that he needed to continue to his job in Show Low. Each evening, something held him back, Najoni's request to show him her favorite spot on the reservation, Daniel's invitation to join him checking forest conditions, Desba's quiet insistence that he try her traditional dishes. On the fourth day, Morgan sat on the porch, his backpack at his feet. He'd called the lodge in Show Low and explained his situation, asking if they could hold the position for another week. They'd agreed, but reluctantly. He couldn't delay much longer. Daniel joined him, handing him a mug of coffee before settling into the chair beside him. "You are thinking of leaving," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. Morgan nodded. "I have commitments. A job waiting." "A seasonal job," Daniel remarked. "And then what?" "Another temporary position somewhere else." The directness of the question caught Morgan off guard. "That's been my pattern, yes." They sat in silence for a moment, watching as Ella helped Desba hang laundry in the yard. Najoni darted between them, trying to be helpful, but mostly creating more work, which the women accepted with good-natured patience. "Before I met Ella," Daniel said, "I was working in Phoenix. Good job, good money. I thought that was where my future was." He paused, sipping his coffee. "When my father died, I came home for the funeral. Planned to stay a week, then go back. That was 12 years ago." Morgan glanced at him. "What changed?" "I remember who I was," Daniel said simply. "In Phoenix, I was just another guy in an office. Here, I'm connected to something bigger, my community, my heritage, the land." He set down his mug. "I'm not saying your path should be like mine. Just that sometimes the detours we think are temporary turn out to be the actual journey." Before Morgan could respond, a truck pulled into the yard. A man about Daniel's age stepped out, nodding to them before approaching. "Morgan, this is Victor Ethelbaugh," Daniel said. "He's the superintendent for our tribal forestry program." The men shook hands, and Victor wasted no time getting to the point. "Daniel tells me you have experience with construction and maintenance work." Morgan nodded, surprised. "I worked construction in Chicago for 15 years. Maintenance jobs since then." "We're expanding our fire management program," Victor explained. "Building new facilities, upgrading others. We need someone with your skills." He paused. "It would be a 6-month contract to start, housing included." Morgan stared at him, then at Daniel, who shrugged. "I might have mentioned your background to Victor." "I appreciate the offer," Morgan said carefully, "but I don't know if I'm looking to settle anywhere right now." Victor nodded. "Think about it. The position doesn't start for 2 weeks." He handed Morgan a card. "Call me if you're interested." After Victor left, Morgan turned to Daniel. "Did you arrange that?" "I mentioned you," Daniel admitted. "The rest was Victor's idea. We do need the help, and it would mean a lot to the community to have the man who saved Najoni stay on." Morgan ran his fingers over Victor's card. 6 months in one place. It was longer than he'd stayed anywhere since leaving Chicago. Later that afternoon, Morgan hiked to the spot where he'd pulled Najoni from the river. The water had receded somewhat, but still flowed strong and purposeful. He sat on a rock overlooking the current, thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. He'd left Chicago running from pain, from the dissolution of his 15-year marriage, from the emptiness of the house after Sarah moved out, from the pitying looks of friends and colleagues. 3 years of drifting had numbed the worst of it, but hadn't brought him any closer to figuring out what came next. And now this, a child saved, a community that embraced him, a name given in ceremony, and a job offer that would mean staying put, at least for a while. Morgan was so deep in thought that he didn't hear the approaching footsteps until Desba lowered herself onto the rock beside him. Neither spoke for several minutes, watching the river together. "You think too much," she finally said, her voice matter-of-fact. Morgan couldn't help but smile. "Probably. The river brought you here," Desba continued. "The river that took my husband brought you to save my granddaughter. There's meaning in that." "I'm not sure I believe in that kind of meaning," Morgan said honestly. Desba shrugged. "Belief is not required for truth to be truth." She placed a gnarled hand on his arm. "You have been running. Maybe it is time to stand still." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the water, Morgan felt the weight of the decision before him. continue the rootless existence that had become his refuge, or accept the unexpected connection that had been offered to him here, among people who were strangers just days ago. Desba seemed to read his thoughts. "Home is not always where we begin," she said. "Sometimes it is where we are found." A month later, Morgan stood on the porch of his newly assigned housing, a small but comfortable two-bedroom home on the outskirts of the reservation, provided as part of his employment with the tribal forestry program. The morning air was crisp, hinting at the approaching autumn. In the distance, he could see the mountains where he would be helping to construct a new fire observation tower. His decision to stay had surprised him more than anyone else. After his conversation with Desba by the river, he'd driven to show Lo to explain in person why he wouldn't be taking the lodge job. Then he'd returned to the reservation and called Victor to accept his offer. The 6-month contract felt both terrifying and liberating, an anchor after years of drifting. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew his attention. Daniel's truck pulled up, Najoni waving enthusiastically from the passenger window. "We came to help you settle in," she announced as she bounded from the truck. In the month since her near drowning, the girl had attached herself to Morgan with unwavering certainty, as if the ceremonial bond between them was the most natural thing in the world. Daniel emerged more slowly, carrying a box. "Ella sent some kitchen basics. She figured you probably don't have much." He was right. Morgan's possessions consisted of what he could carry in his backpack and a few boxes of items he'd retrieved from a storage unit in Flagstaff, remnants of his former life that he hadn't been able to part with but hadn't looked at in years. Inside, Najoni immediately began planning where things should go, her bossy confidence making both men smile. As they unpacked, Daniel updated Morgan on the forestry project. "The materials for the tower arrive next week. Victor wants you to head up the construction team, given your experience." Morgan nodded, pleased at the vote of confidence. "I'll need to review the plans again, but it seems straightforward." They worked through the morning, arranging furniture, unpacking Morgan's few possessions, and installing some basic shelving that Daniel had brought. Around noon, there was another knock at the door. Morgan opened it to find Ella and Desba, along with several other women from a community, each carrying dishes of food. "Housewarming," Ella explained with a smile. "Everyone brings something to make sure your new home is filled with good energy, and you never go hungry." As they set up an impromptu feast on Morgan's small dining table, he was struck again by the generosity of these people who had so quickly embraced him. Their acceptance still felt unearned, a gift he wasn't sure how to repay. After they ate, Desba presented Morgan with a package wrapped in cloth. "For your new home," she said. Inside was a hand-woven blanket in rich earth tones, browns, russets, and deep blues that reminded Morgan of the river at sunset. "You made this?" he asked, running his fingers over the intricate pattern. Desba nodded. "I started it the day after you pulled Najoni from the water. The pattern tells the story." Morgan examined the blanket more closely and could indeed make out shapes that suggested flowing water, 2 figures, and what appeared to be smoke rising. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "for everything." As the afternoon progressed, more community members stopped by, each bringing something: practical items for the house, food, small decorative pieces. By evening, the previously empty home felt lived in, personal in a way Morgan hadn't experienced since leaving Chicago. After everyone had gone, Morgan sat alone on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. His phone buzzed with a text message from his ex-wife, Sarah, responding to the news he'd shared earlier in the week about his decision to stay in Arizona. "Sounds like you found something important there. I'm happy for you. Take care, Em." It was the most personal exchange they'd had in years, lacking the tension that had characterized their final months together. Perhaps distance and time had softened the edges of their failed marriage, allowing something like friendship to emerge from the ashes. Morgan tucked the phone away and returned his gaze to the darkening sky. In the month since pulling Najoni from the river, he'd begun to feel the tight knot of bitterness in his chest loosening. The past 3 years of constant movement had been necessary, perhaps, a time of healing and reflection, but not a sustainable way to live. Tomorrow, he would begin his work with the forestry program, He would continue learning about Apache culture from Desba and the other elders. He would watch Najoni grow and help her understand the world as best he could, honoring the unexpected bond they now shared. For the first time in years, Morgan looked toward the future with something resembling hope. He had been a drifter pulled by currents he didn't understand. But here, among these people who called him Son of Smoke, he had found an unexpected shore. Not an ending to his journey, but perhaps a new beginning.